How to reduce your credit score. Plus, did I say reduce? I meant how to improve your credit score. How to reduce your expenses. Man, we're off to a slow start here on Mother's Day weekend. How to improve your credit score and how to reduce your expenses. Those are the topics on this week's program here on Dollars and Cents. My name is Joel Garris, certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning. So, first and foremost, happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there. First, of course, my mom, and then the mother of my children, my wife, Stephanie, and then her mom, June. Three fabulous women that we will be going out to brunch with and having a good time celebrating Mother's Day. So it's not too late to go out and get that card or that gift, but you probably want to get on that, given that it is Mother's Day indeed. Last weekend, big weekend as well around the Garris household. My oldest son, Nelson, graduated from Auburn University. We had the whole crew up there, the four octogenarians that are in our lives, my mom, my mother-in-law, my dad, and Stephanie's aunt. All four were able to make it. Didn't go to the actual ceremony because that seemed a little bit trickier because it was in like a big basketball arena and those kinds of things. But we're there for the weekend festivities. So that was a lot of fun. Nelson is now graduating, now begins the job search in earnest. So if you're looking for someone who has a major in business analytics with an interest in sports, contact me and I'll connect you to Nelson. So anyway, for many, it is also not just college graduation season, right? It's high school graduation season. Pretty much it's graduation season if it is in May. For the high schoolers, it seemed like just yesterday I was at Nelson's high school graduation from Boone High School. And lo and behold, for those that are going off to college, well, then the big conversation is always about how on earth do you manage to pay for or fund college education in today's world. So we thought it only appropriate, given the time of year that it is, to sort of talk about some of the options that you have out there for helping to fund and pay for college. Now, obviously, if they're going off to college in the fall, probably should have thought about it a little bit earlier. And if you haven't thought about it, then you're probably relegated to trying to find as many scholarships, grants, and sadly loans as possible. But for those of you who want to kind of pre-plan and think about ways that you can put some money aside for the inevitable day, because by the way, it comes much faster than you think it's going to come. There are three basic vehicles that you have out there when it comes to saving money for college. And each one of them sort of has its own pros and cons. We're going to kind of hit the highlights on that and spend some time talking about 529 college savings plans, because that frankly was very helpful for me on a personal basis to utilize that to help pay for said Auburn University. So three main options when it comes to saving for college. You've got your prepaid plans, which are basically you buy sort of the plans based upon the cost of tuition today, with the notion that, okay, yeah, cost of tuition and cost of room and board is going to go up. And so you buy it at today's rate, and ultimately you get coverage for that room and board or that tuition. So it's tied to more of those, shall we say, inflationary types of increases that you would typically see for college tuition, college room and board. Although, frankly, college tuition and room and board hasn't really followed inflation. It's been like twice the rate of inflation, which I don't quite understand, but that's a whole nother conversation when it comes to how colleges have justified these cost increases that they have done over the course of the past 20 odd years. But that's how the prepaid works. You also have a Coverdell educational savings account. Coverdell educational savings account, though, is restricted in terms of how much you can put in on an annual basis. It's like $2,000. You have to be below a certain income level in order to have an educational savings account. And then the other limitation is that you have to have it all used up by 30. But with that, it's more of an investment approach, right? So however the money performs from an investment perspective, that's how much money is going to be in there and to be able to use it. Now, in both the prepaid and the educational savings, and for that matter, 529 savings types of plans, there's no upfront tax deduction. The benefit is that the future growth is tax-free when you're using it for educational expenses. And we'll talk here a little bit about how broad said educational expenses are, but there's no tax savings per se on making those contributions. Now, in some states, if you've got a state income tax, there may be some tax credits or things like that that you're able to do when you fund a program that is in that particular state. But obviously, for most of our listening audience sitting here in Florida, doesn't really apply. So what that does is that means that gives you the option to kind of go where the opportunities are, go where the best investment choice is from a investment point of view, because when you're doing an educational savings account, or for that matter, a 529 college savings, then it's all about, okay, well, what's the return? How much is this money that I'm putting in going to turn into? Because then when I use that money, then I can use it for whatever I want, assuming it's a qualified educational expense. So those are sort of the three big options. The 529, just to kind of add a little bit more details to that piece, which is a college savings types of plan. Those aren't income restricted, so you don't have to be below a certain income level. You can do it no matter how much income you have. Again, don't get a tax deduction, but you can contribute a much larger amount of money. And in fact, you can sort of accelerate the gifting and contribute a total of up to $85,000 in a single year. If you do that, then you can't do that again for 5 years. But if you do $85,000 for a newborn or a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, then my goodness, that's probably going to come pretty close to being able to cover the cost of school. That is for sure. Our preference, as we mentioned, is those college savings types of plans. They just give you a lot more flexibility. I suspected that my kids might not, because we've got sort of families scattered all across the eastern seaboard kind of thing. So I sort of suspected that they might really not stay in Florida when that time comes. And lo and behold, all three of them are at different schools. And so those are all out of state. The college savings types of plans gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you can use that money. With the prepaid plans, you're kind of limited to just what is available within your state. Certainly you do get some credits back and things like that if the kids decide to go out of state, but it's not quite as lucrative or as valuable, if you will, versus a 529 savings account. So certainly use that to sort of fully bridge the gap, if you will, up at Old Auburn University. So it worked out very nicely. And so obviously, given experience, that is our preference among those three options. But we thought it would be good to talk a little bit about how these types of accounts work a little bit more on the program, given that it is May graduation season. So stay tuned with us through the break, and we'll continue this conversation with a little more details about how that 529 college savings types of investment vehicles actually work. Coming up next here on the program, Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Mother's Day weekend, which means it must be May, which means it's also graduation season weekend. So congratulations to all the mothers out there, plus all the graduates out there, one of whom happens to be my oldest son, who graduated from college last weekend from Auburn University. So War Eagle, go Nelson. Hopefully you find a job. That's the next chapter of life, finding that job. On the program, we are talking, though, about one of the most popular savings vehicles when it comes to putting money aside and utilizing it for college expenses, and that is your college savings types of plans. Certainly, that is our choice, our favorite choice. Certainly was helpful to use that during the course of Nelson's years at Auburn to help reduce down the cost of that institution. And certainly from an accessibility point of view, your college savings accounts, while they are not certainly accounts that come with tax deductions as you're funding them, they do grow tax deferred and they are tax free when used for educational expenses. And certainly over the years, they have become very popular. Total net assets in 529 plans were over 388 billion at the end of last year. That level had, in fact, more than doubled over the course of the past 10 years. So obviously become very, very popular. Again, no upfront tax savings, if you will, on them, unless you're in a state where some states offer some tax credits if there's an income tax in that particular state. But the reality is that certainly a very user-friendly type of account that allows you to use that money for a variety of college expenses. So in this segment, we're going to talk about some of those details and sort of how to use it if you have it, because obviously the fall and college graduation and those kinds of things will be here much faster than you know it. I can't believe how quickly it happened in my own personal family. So this segment of the program, we'll be talking about more about some of the details behind college savings 529 types of plans. Also, of course, this is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. We're one of Central Florida's longest running radio programs, coming to you on a host of radio stations throughout the Central Florida region. Also happen to be one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web. So make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast channel or social media channel of choice, including the folks over at YouTube as well, where you can see a video of this program coming to you direct from the Nelson Financial Planning Radio Studios. If you haven't been to the office lately, well, then you should come and check it out, because we've got our own little radio studio now right in-house here at the office. So a neat little area that we've added here into the office. Anyway, my name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of great folks who also happen to be certified financial fiduciaries as well, that stand ready to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. Speaking of fellow certified financial fiduciaries, joined on the program last week by fellow certified financial fiduciary Rob Field. Also, we're talking about that credential, certified financial fiduciary, not just perhaps the industry's most one of the industry's most esteemed credentials. Certainly it has the highest fiduciary standard, which means that you're putting your client's interests above all else out of any of the different accreditations and certifications out there. What is unique to it, it is one of only 11, speaking of accreditations, one of only 11 designations, as we were talking about last week with Rob on the program, one of only 11 designations that is recognized as a national accredited designation. So anyway, on to the conversation about 529s and where you can use them for. It certainly is all accredited U.S. colleges, universities, but it can also be used at many trade schools, at many post-secondary schools outside the U.S., even can be used for private K through 12. So the range of eligible institutions is, it's not just you got to go to a 4-year college or anything like that. It is a much broader ability to use those at a variety of institutions. But you do have to understand that certain expenses are qualified expenses in terms of qualified educational expenses, and certain expenses are not qualified educational expenses. So what are the types of expenses that you can use for that 529? Well, obviously tuition, fees, books, supplies, equipment, computers, software, internet access. Sorry, not software for gaming. That's not an educational expense. But those kinds of expenses are generally included in the notion of qualified educational expenses. Similarly for room and board, if the student is enrolled at least half time, even if a student is living and eating off campus, you can use 529s for things like rent and grocery bills as well, because obviously that's a cost of going to college. So pretty broad in terms of what you can use in terms of tuition, fees, books, supplies, computers, software, things like that, room, board, on campus, off campus. The only major sort of category that it can't really be used for is transportation. So if they're going to school out of state, it can't be used for the airline tickets back and forth. Those types of items are not considered qualified educational expenses. And then in today's world, you can also use up to $10,000 of 529 funds to pay student loan debt for the named beneficiary. Although that one always kind of makes me scratch my head, because if you had the 529 money, why did you bother to borrow the money? Because when you borrow money on a student loan, chances are that that interest starts accruing the second you take that loan. So I'm not sure about that one, but yeah, that's an option. Similarly, starting next year, there's an additional option that allows you, to the extent that the 529 is over 15 years of age. So it's got to be a 529 that's been around a long time. To the extent that it is older than that, and there is leftover money, or maybe they didn't go to school, or maybe they did it quicker, or maybe they went to an institution that wasn't as expensive. Anyway, you've got a 529 with a balance left over. There's an option to be able to convert that money up to 35,000 over to a Roth. So something new for next year. But using 529s is relatively tax efficient and easy to be able to do. Oftentimes you can do it as a direct payment to the institution. In my case, one of the things that I did was I just used it as a reimbursement approach, where I just went ahead and sent whatever the school needed for money, and then I sort of reimbursed myself. Ideally, you want to do that in the same calendar year, because there is a tax document that gets generated. It's called a 1099-Q, and that shows the amount of the payout. When you do a payout, it's done on a pro rata basis. So what that means is that when you get a payout from a 529, there's a portion that's earnings, and it's a portion of the original money that you contributed to that 529. So if you take 10,000 out, some of it's going to be earnings, some of it's going to be the original amount that you put in. So that's how those are reported from a tax perspective. You don't actually need to report 529 withdrawals on a tax return. So you get the 1099-Q and you're like, okay, I got this information. You don't have to put it on the return anywhere, unless you didn't use it for a qualified educational expense. In that case, you have to put it on there. And in that case, then you would owe taxes plus a 10% penalty on the earnings piece, not the principal piece. So be aware that there are some tax implications and penalties if you don't use this for qualified educational expenses. Now, I want to just say a few words, because we've run into this situation before. You set up the 529, you've got it there, it's earmarked for college, and then people don't necessarily wind up using it. And so we would say, use it. It's what it is there for. People sometimes forget about it, say, oh no, I'm going to use it later, going to use it later, going to use it later. The reality is that you really should just go ahead and use it. Maybe use more of it initially rather than later. Again, because student loans accrue interest right from the very beginning. But certainly it's something that you want to utilize along the way when it comes to paying for college. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to talk about ways to improve your credit score. Coming up next here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. So how do you actually improve your credit score? Let's face it, Improving your credit score takes time, it takes patience, it takes diligence, but understand just how important it is in terms of trying to improve that score, right? I mean, effectively, the world sort of runs on credit, right? Credit cards, mortgages, bank loans, car loans, all of those kinds of things. And what your credit score is affects how much ultimately you're going to pay. So there's a cost savings to you if your credit score is better, right? You might wind up with easier credit approval, lower interest rates if your credit score is better loan terms if your credit score is well. So certainly there are some cost savings. And then in today's world, folks like landlords, insurers, and even some employers will use your credit info. So not necessarily your credit score, but they'll look at your credit info to assess your riskiness as to whether you would make a good employee. So a lot goes into your credit report and your credit score. And so we thought it only important to spend some time on the program talking about ways in which you can try and improve it. So welcome on into the program. This course is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. We're one of Central Florida's longest running radio programs. Also happen to be a top 25 financial planning podcast on the World Wide Web. So make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite social media or podcast platform of choice. My name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of certified financial fiduciaries that stand ready this week to help you improve your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So how is the credit score calculated in the first place, right? I mean, obviously it's based upon your credit report, and it can vary between the three different credit reporting agencies. So you've got Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. All of those are the different credit scoring agencies. And depending upon how certain lenders are reporting or creditors are reporting, then you can have some variation in your credit score between those three different organizations. But fundamentally, what goes into making up your credit score is basically 5 different components, and the largest of which is simply your payment history. Are you consistently paying your bills on time? That accounts for about 35% of your overall credit score. Next up is what is known as your credit utilization rate. So what that means is sort of the amount that you owe relative to the amount that you could borrow. So that's a ratio that the credit scoring companies obviously calculate, looking at the amount of the revolving credit you're using divided by the total available. You want that number to be basically at 30% or less in order to score well in this part of the credit scoring methodology. So that's the credit utilization rate. That credit utilization rate winds up being perhaps it is the second largest component of your credit score, making up about 30% of what constitutes your credit score. So you got 35% is your payment history, and then 30% is your credit utilization rate. So those two factors amount to almost 2/3 of your credit score. The remaining third is made up of sort of 3 different items, first of which is your credit age. And this is sort of the largest weight of those 3 remaining items. A common misconception, I want to close things down as they are paid off. But the reality is that credit age, or how long you've kept your accounts open, shows good payment history, shows good track record, shows that you're paying things on time. And so consequently, credit age winds up being a factor in your credit score. I actually saw my personal credit score go down when I sold a house and had a mortgage that got paid off that I'd had for 20 odd years. That type of thing where you've got something like that that's on your credit report ultimately helps to improve your credit score because you've got 20 years of paying the thing on time. So be careful when you pay stuff off, or if you've got some stuff that is sitting around that you don't necessarily use. If you just close out those accounts, that can actually negatively impact your credit score because that would reduce down the overall age of your potential credit profile on your credit report. So certainly something to think about on that. Credit mix is another factor. You want to have a variety of credit accounts, whether that's credit cards or student loans or mortgages or car loans, those types of things. Obviously, the credit scoring companies are looking to see some that you can handle the diversified payments that come with owing different loans on different things. And then lastly, whether you've recently been applying for credit. So those hard inquiries of applying for credit where they say, okay, we're going to check your credit score. That can certainly help to drive down your credit. So in today's world, what's a good credit score? Well, if you kind of look at the numbers, the range is if you've got below about 580, that's generally considered poor. Fair is 580 to 670 in terms of your credit score. Good credit is between 670 and about 740. Very good, 740 to 800, and then excellent, of course, is 800 to 850. So that's kind of the scoring mechanism, if you will, that takes all 5 of those factors: your payment history, your credit utilization rate, your age of the credit, the diversification of the credit mix, and then the number of hard inquiries. Takes all those 5 factors and kind of puts them all together and creates your credit score. And that's sort of how the ranges wind up playing out in terms of whether you've got poor credit or excellent credit. So that's the backdrop of what makes up the credit score. So how do you go about trying to improve? Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of the break, it's not an overnight type of process. You've got to be patient, you've got to be diligent, and it takes effort in order to improve your credit score. And I guess it starts with reviewing your credit report, right? The profile that these organizations have on you in terms of what you owe for the various debts and what you have outstanding. Now, one of the things that the reason why you want to start there is you want to make sure that it really is all your stuff that's attached to your profile and not somebody else's. Obviously, inaccuracies or forgeries or identity theft, those types of things happen are pretty pervasive. So you want to make sure that your credit report is as clean as it is, and it's only your stuff on it. So start there, if you will, in terms of the analysis, and then get in the habit of paying things on time, right? I mean, that's a big part, or the biggest part of improving of your credit score. So obviously trying to get things paid on time and in full, avoiding late payments is sort of one of the first steps to improving your credit score. Keep the utilization rate low, right? We mentioned the 30% utilization rate is what they look for. To try and stay below that number. Don't be maximizing out your cards each and every month. That's going to increase your credit utilization rate and thereby drop your credit score. And then in terms of hard inquiries, right? Limit the amount of times that you're applying for new accounts, because those inquiries can add up and negatively impact your credit score. And try and keep those older accounts open. Again, as we were sharing earlier, sold a house. When you sell the house, the mortgage gets all paid off. That was a mortgage that I had had for like 20 years because it was the house that we raised the kids in. And so that meant that that history had gone away. And in fact, I actually saw my credit score drop a little bit as a result of that. So again, it takes patience and diligence to improve your credit score. It's not overnight. Certainly, some of the negative factors are easier to overcome than others. But you want to make sure that you are doing what you can do to improve your credit score as much as possible, because so much of it depends on that. You're going to pay more. It's going to cost you more if your credit score is not as good. You're not going to have as good of access to being able to get credit. And in a lot of cases, your employer, your insurance company, your landlord running a credit report on you to see whether you are a good risk. So those are just some of the things to be thinking about as it relates to your credit score. When we come back, we're going to have a few more thoughts on some of the ways in which you can build or start to establish credit. Coming up next here on the program Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Continuing the conversation from the last segment of the program, talking now about ways in which that you can build or establish credit, right? So let's say you are a new college grad, much like my son Nelson, and you're trying to, kind of get started in the world at large, and credit's such a big part of that. Certainly, those folks that are just starting out might have sort of a thinner credit file. Certainly, they wouldn't have a long payment history, or a age of credit would be shorter than most. So, what are the ways in which you can kind of establish that credit? Well, we've got a few thoughts on the program that we're going to share with you here. So one of the ways in which you could do that is using a secured credit card, right? So how that works is that you basically put money down, and you put the money down up front, and then you have a credit card, and then you can use that up to the amount of the money that you've already put down. Obviously, a secured credit card, it's kind of a no risk proposition for the credit card issuer because they've already sort of collected the money ahead of time. So that's one of the ways in which you can start to build credit. Similarly, student credit cards are often utilized as a way to build credit, particularly for those that are in school. Although here's the thing on this one, I tried this one early on, like when Nelson was first going off to college, and I couldn't really get anywhere with it because even though I was like talking to like a major bank that supposedly does a lot of student credit cards, it always seemed to come back to, well, does he have a job? And I'm like, he doesn't have a job because this is a student credit card and this is what we're applying for. But it never really seemed to get much traction on those student credit cards. But that's often used as a way to try and help establish credit. At the end of the day, we had to go with one of the other options, which was just being either an authorized user or a co-signer on a card. So the difference between the two is, as an authorized user, you are allowed to use that credit card, and you are a user on that card. So that means that you would get the benefits of any payments that were being made on an on-time basis, but the account itself isn't actually in your name. Co-signer allows you to maybe secure better loan terms or qualify for a loan you might not otherwise get. Similarly, though, as a co-signer, you are in fact on that credit card itself. So got a little bit more of a profile, if you will, on that. And then one of the things that you can do to help improve that thin credit profile is to ask your landlord or your utility company to report on-time payments as well. That's certainly something that you can do and ask them. And that's one of the things that is relatively new that allows you to try and improve that history or that thin credit score. So just some of the ways in which, if you're just starting out, that you can engage in improving your credit report in your credit profile to hopefully improve your credit score. So welcome on into the program. This course is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. My name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner and a certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of great folks, all of whom happen to be certified financial fiduciaries who stand ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So a couple of sort of parting thoughts on 529s. We've talked about those at length. Obviously thought it appropriate given that it is May graduation season. A lot of kids will be off to school for the first time in the fall. Spent a lot of time earlier in the program talking about 529s and how they work, but also wanted to just sort of emphasize one of the things that we mentioned, and that is this notion of, if you've got a 529, go ahead and use it, because that's what it's there for. You'd be surprised at how many people keep saying, oh, I'm not going to use it now, I'm going to put it off. But here's the thing, if you've got a 529 and you keep putting off using it and you're borrowing money instead, you're missing the fact that interest on student loans typically accrues from the day you sign the loan. And that means those student loans that you took in year 1 or year 2 are accruing interest for a much longer period of time than, say, the student loans that you took in years 3 and 4. Now, obviously, if they're subsidized student loans, then they're not accruing interest because that's getting paid along the way. Hence, that's why they're called subsidized. But if they're unsubsidized, then that interest starts to accrue right from day 1. So what that means is if you've got a 529, it actually behooves you to use that earlier on rather than just, oh, here's the balance and I'll divide by 4 and then I'll just use a little bit each and every year. No, the better strategy is really probably to use that in years 1 or 2 a little bit more than trying to evenly spread it because of this notion of the interest accruing along the way. So certainly some things to be aware of in terms of how those expenses wind up working. Another thing on the tax side, we mentioned earlier that if you use it for a qualified educational expense, then there's not really any tax reporting, if you will. Well, couple of things to remember on that. Number one, make sure you retain very good records of that just in case the IRS ever comes a knocking, because then you would have to prove that that money was spent on qualified educational expenses. So that's number one. Number two, there is another provision that you have to be aware of that for tax purposes, there's no double dipping allowed. And what that means is that if you've got $1 of qualified educational expenses, it can only be used once. So let's say you got a $5,000 tuition bill and you take $5,000 out of your 529. The reality is that you can't use that same $5,000 of tuition expense to qualify yourself for some of the many tax credits that might be out there, such as American Opportunity Credit or Lifetime Learning Credit. You can't use those same dollars for the same thing. So if you're going to use your expense to justify tax-free treatment of a 529 withdrawal, you can't turn around and use those same expenses to get a tax credit or, for that matter, a tax-free scholarship. So you've got to be careful on double dipping and layering up of those same dollars when you are using a 529 or you're taking advantage of some of the tax credits that are out there. So it's certainly something to be aware of when it comes to the tax side of things as it relates to college savings types of vehicles. 529s, one of the biggest reasons why we also prefer them is the ability to move them and transfer them from one beneficiary to another without any tax consequences. So if it's in the same family, and that concept of family is broadly defined under the 529 IRS code. It allows for spouses, it allows for first cousins, descendants, siblings. So it's a pretty broad definition of who could potentially take advantage of a 529. And you can also leave those accounts to someone after you pass. Because here's the thing, as we mentioned earlier in the program, an educational savings account has to be used by the time you're 30. An age limit does not apply to a 529. So effectively, you can have a 529 existing in perpetuity. So a very powerful, potentially intergenerational type of an account that can be used for many, many years to come. In fact, there was a sort of a small balance left on Nelson's 529 that I'm just going to kind of leave sitting there and be able to have that for when he has kids. So just a couple of remaining thoughts on kind of how 529s and the like work. Well, that's about it for this week's episode of Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, visit nelsonfinancialplanning.com to see how we can help you improve your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. Go to that website, nelsonfinancialplanning.com, fill out the Contact Us form to set up an absolutely free conversation. Have a great rest of the Sunday. Happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers out there. Thanks for listening to the program.